So Melissa can hear me now when I talk into the microphone?
Melissa, can you hear Patty?
I can, but it's a little bit distorted.
Brian, you may have to sit there and repeat back if the committee has any questions during the presentation. You may have to repeat back the question.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started on our meeting. I'd like to call the Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee meeting to order at 1:05 on February 8th, 2018. And Melissa, if you'll bear with us, we just have some minutes to approve. It should take really less than a minute to do this. So we have minutes from the May 11th, 2017, August 1st, 2017, August 28th, 2017, and October 9th, 2017, Speech Language Pathology Committee, Practice Committee minutes. And I'm wondering if I can get a motion to, do we have to take each one separately, or can we take them as a package?
You can take them together.
Okay, so we'll take them together, and I'm wondering if I can have a motion to approve those minutes?
I so motion.
So Debbie Snow moves it, and can I get a second?
Second.
So Dee Parker has seconded the minutes. Does anyone have any changes, revisions to the minutes?
The motion to approve them as they are.
Yes. Okay, so then let's go ahead and vote. Do we need to vote into
Public comment first, just to
public comment on the minutes? So seeing no public comment, let's go ahead and vote. And I think we need to each vote individually, correct? No?
there just needs to be an accurate reflection of who voted which way. So since there's three of you, you can do it by raising hands if you want, or you can do a roll call.
Let's go ahead and raise hands
pleasure.
for fun. So all in favor signify by saying, raising their hands. Opposed? Abstained? None. So the minutes are approved as indicated with a vote of 3 yes and 0 no and no abstentions.
And then Patty, if you don't mind just doing a quick roll call to establish that on the record that we have a quorum.
Sure. So roll call for the practice committee.
Debbie Snow, public member, speech language pathologist committee member. Oh, sorry.
Do I need to repeat it? Debbie Snow, public member, committee member.
Patty Solomon Rice, speech language pathology member.
Dee Parker, speech language pathology member.
Okay, great. So we're on to agenda item number 3, which is public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Are there any public comments for items that aren't on this speech language pathology practice committee agenda? And it looks like none. So Melissa, now we can move on to you. Thank you so much. So the Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee is looking into issues of concern that might impact our current regulations in the area of speech language pathology, telehealth, or telepractice. There are a number of different synonyms for the term. And we initially discussed this at a prior meeting and realized that we really didn't have sufficient information to move forward, so we thought we need to speak to some speech and language pathology experts in this area, and the expert that came to mind is Melissa Jakubowicz. Melissa Jakubowicz is the American Speech Language Hearing Association coordinator of one of their special interest groups, which is Special Interest Group 18, and that is our telepractice special interest group. Melissa's also employed in that particular setting as well, so what a wonderful resource for us to tap into. We invited Melissa to come speak to us today, and specifically to address issues that might impact regulations of the Speech Language Pathology, Audiology, and Hearing Aid Dispensing Board. So it's a pretty open topic, and we really appreciate Melissa joining us today.
Well, thank you, Patty. I appreciate that. And I'll start out by sharing some general information about telepractice with you, and then I'm certainly open for questions, and hopefully some of my comments will bring up some questions, concerns that people have, and will help the licensing board move forward with their work on telepractice. I use the term telepractice because that's what ASHA uses, and ASHA decided on the term telepractice primarily because we have SLPs and audiologists who work in a variety of settings: medical, schools, private practice, clinics, etc. And if we use the term telemedicine, telehealth, it really only refers to the medical side of it. So I will continue to refer to it as telepractice, but understand that the terms can be used interchangeably. One of the things that ASHA has done is develop a definition of telepractice, and this can be found on their website in the practice portal under telepractice. And ASHA defines telepractice as the application of telecommunications technology to deliver professional services at a distance, linking client to clinician for assessment, intervention, and or consultation. And based on that definition, you really, when we think of telepractice in this era, we think of using video conferencing technology. However, if you think about the word telecommunications, and if you think of the phone being a form of telecommunication, we've really been using telepractice for quite some time. As a clinician, I would frequently consult with other professionals and do it via the phone. So it's also important to know that telepractice is currently being used nationwide and across state lines. There are now numerous companies that work with telepractice and provide telepractice services. ASHA is currently working with a number of stakeholders to develop a licensing compact. The licensing compact can take many forms, but currently physical therapists, physicians, nurses, and psychologists all have compacts in order to facilitate practice across state lines. And this is not just for telepractice, but it also allows these folks to easily obtain a license in a new state if that is where the services are needed. One of the other important pieces that I think it's extremely important to remember as you're thinking about developing regulations around telepractice, it's a mode of service delivery and not a fundamental change in services. So we're still providing speech and language services. We're still using all of our knowledge and skills as SLPs and audiologists to provide these services. And we're making decisions about whether or not a client is appropriate for telepractice. So it's not a one-size-fits-all delivery methodology, just like any other service delivery mode. If you look at what we do and how we do it, clients are being served on an individual basis. They're being served in groups. They're being served in the schools, in clinics, in medical settings. So again, it is not a one-size-fits-all kind of model. And as we do with in-person service delivery, the clinician must use their clinical judgment to determine whether or not telepractice is appropriate in their particular setting. We always have to keep in mind that the unique needs of the client must be paramount in our decision-making process. And I think this is really important. There tends to be a push when telepractice services are used, particularly in the schools. It tends to be, here you're taking over this caseload of this SLP that's left, or we haven't been able to fill this position, and you have to see all of the kids, when all of the kids may not be appropriate. So it's important to keep that piece in mind. Currently, there's more than 40 years of research related to speech and language intervention delivered via telepractice, and by and large, the evidence has demonstrated that telepractice is a feasible and effective model for for providing these services to a broad range of clients. In a couple of articles that have actually been systematic reviews of the telepractice articles, the results indicated overwhelmingly positive results. And in some of the more recent research, particularly with kids on the autism spectrum, they're actually finding that the kids are making better progress than when they receive the services in person. And that's kind of fascinating. It's new research, and whether or not that will hold out as the research delves into that and we get larger studies will be interesting to see. I think that right now there are some potential barriers to telepractice. One of them is technological barriers, things like slow internet speeds, old equipment, compatibility, connections, and tech support. In some of the rural areas, including in our own state of California, the internet speeds are still not great, and sometimes in really rural areas, the internet speeds do not support telepractice. And one of the things that ASHA says in their documents and in the Code of Ethics, when we're providing services via telepractice, the quality must be equivalent to in-person services. So if the internet speeds are slow, you're not going to get the same quality, and if the picture and the audio is cutting in and out, again, you're not going to get great services provided that way. One of the other barriers are regulatory barriers. I think one of the biggest issues is the cost of licensure in more than one state, and many FOPs who provide services across states maintain more than one license, and the cost of that does get to be cost prohibitive, especially when you're getting on to 3, 4, 5 licenses. Another barrier is keeping abreast of those licensure laws in more than one state. And there are some states that have had restrictive laws that didn't allow telepractice to happen unless the telepractice clinician sees the student or client in person first. And this really does create a barrier to telepractice, and it's important to understand that it is possible to create that client-clinician relationship across the video conferencing platform. It's probably more difficult with someone who's not as tech-savvy and not comfortable being on the camera, but it can be done, and it's been shown in a number of studies that you can establish that rapport that you need in order to appropriately serve the client. Fiscal barriers are also a part of this. Third-party reimbursement. Currently, Medicare does not reimburse for telepractice services by FLPs. Medicare does reimburse some medical telepractice services, but it's somewhat limited at this point. As far as I understand, Medi-Cal in California does reimburse some telepractice services, particularly in the schools, so that's certainly helpful. And some of the other fiscal barriers include the purchase of equipment such as computers, headsets, microphones, cost of hiring employees to provide the services, etc. Right now, telepractice, probably the majority of telepractice, somewhere, I would say, between 60 to 75% of the telepractice services being provided today are being provided in the schools. And again, telepractice with adults is primarily due to lack of reimbursement from Medicare, as I mentioned earlier. The other type of barriers are perceptual barriers, which are really the ones that are hardest to overcome. You often encounter pushback from on-site clinicians. You need to be able to explain the benefits of telepractice to stakeholders and answer tough questions. When I first started in telepractice, we would encounter FLPs who were concerned about losing their jobs because of telepractice. They had concerns about the quality of the services, and they had concerns whether it was an effective service delivery model. And again, some of those perceptual barriers are the most difficult to overcome. One of the things that I encounter on a regular basis with telepractice is there are misperceptions about telepractice, and one of the biggest ones is that you don't have to do any of the paperwork that an in-person SOP has to do, which is totally untrue. As a clinician, you're required to do whatever paperwork is required in the setting that you are in. Also, many of the companies that are out there providing services in schools are providing them on a one-to-one basis rather than in groups, and they're not provided in the same manner necessarily as they would be with in-person services in the schools. And I think that clinicians really need to think about that. In terms of perceptual issues, clinicians think that telepractice is easy. If you're tech savvy, it might be a bit easier, but it takes a lot of thought, planning, training, and practice to provide quality services. You can't just put up your worksheets or your picture cards on the screen and the students are going to react the same. Many of the students that we work with, especially some of the younger ones, have had a lot of exposure to technology, and they want to see something that is very interactive. To put a static worksheet on the screen, and even though the student can type in the answers or move a picture around here and there, that's still not going to keep them engaged. You really need to have and think about having more interactive types of materials. Otherwise, those kids will get bored. So that's sort of a summary of telepractice. I'm happy to answer questions that folks have.
So, Melissa, this is Patty. So one of the biggest issues, as you've already discussed, is the individuals having state licenses across lines. So can you give us some more specifics about those types of regulatory issues that the licensing board should be thinking about? Clearly, we have to have something that addresses license individuals, requiring individuals to have licenses within our state. And that, I think, probably is one we already knew. But what are some other issues that might not be as straightforward that perhaps your special interest group has been thinking about or have heard complaints or concerns about? Do you have any additional concerns that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, definitely. A big issue that we're dealing with is supervision via telepractice, and I'm talking about supervision of CF, supervision of assistants, supervisions of clinicians. One of the things that the SIG 18 Coordinating Committee talked about a number of months ago was whether or not we thought that telepractice was an appropriate clinical fellow or, in California, RPE experience for a clinician. And everybody in the room, there were 7 or 8 of us on the coordinating committee, and all of us in the room basically said we didn't think that it was appropriate for a CF or RPE to do a full-time telepractice experience. And one of the reasons for this is, and you will see when many companies advertise for positions in the schools, they require a couple of years of in-person experience in the schools. And I think that goes across the board. It's important to understand the culture of the setting that you're going to work in before you do it remotely. It never ceases to amaze me in all of the Facebook groups and the telepractice online communities that are out there. People think that telepractice is easier than actually being in a school setting and working there. And if you're doing it right, Yeah, there are certainly some things that make it easier in telepractice because you're doing things electronically and you may be keeping your records electronically. Materials are online rather than on a shelf in your office, but without having the knowledge of what it is like to work in that setting and understanding a school culture or a hospital culture or a skilled nursing facility culture, it's all a bit different, and you don't really get that if you're doing it from a telepractice point of view. The other thing is, we did talk about it might be appropriate for someone to do it part-time if they're working the other part of the week in that particular setting. And, it's one we struggle with. And I think as universities start adding telepractice training, our views might change, although I still don't know how you get a really good sense of the culture when you're not steeped in it every single day that you're going to work. And in telepractice, you don't have those casual contacts with the school staff. Or in a medical setting, you don't have those casual contacts with the nurses and the doctors. You're not running into them in the hall to have a quick conversation. And I think that's kind of a big issue. I do know that ASHA's Council for Clinical Certification is working towards developing some policies and procedures around supervision, but I do know from ASHA that it's come up quite a bit that CFs want to do their clinical fellowship year in a telepractice setting, and they're not sure how to handle that. And like I said, there are exceptions to the rules. A couple of years ago, I ran into providing services in a school district, and one of the on-site clinicians had been diagnosed with MS, and she was getting to the point where it was very difficult for her to be there physically, but she still had the ability to provide services. And so I worked with the district to set this woman up at home, train her to do telepractice so that she could continue to provide services, but didn't have the physical piece of it, the exhaustion that she had from having to run around the school, pick up the kids, carry all of her materials to and from her car, and those kinds of things. So, certainly there are exceptions to that rule. But I think that if the licensing board, hasn't seen those requests yet, they may start to come in soon, because clinicians are looking at telepractice as a potential CF site. And then, of course, there's the issue of supervision of assistants via telepractice. I think that it can be doable. Again, it really, I think, depends on the setting and the disabilities of the clients that you're working with, and whether the SLP needs to be there on site at least some of the time.
Let's see, am I allowed to ask staff a question during this teleconference? Is that, during the SLP practice committee meeting, is that allowed?
So long as it's regarding
This topic?
Sure.
Yeah, so Melissa, I think you brought up a really good point. I know that the ASHA Council for Clinical Certification has been getting, as you mentioned, a large number of questions about telepractice for clinical fellows, or what we would call our RPs. So I just wanted to ask Brianne or maybe Paul, are we getting any questions about telepractice? Has that come up?
That's been brought to my attention.
Yeah, I think the issue comes up more when it comes to supervision via telepractice. That has come up.
So what kind of issues have come up about supervision in telepractice?
Just whether they can be supervised indirectly.
Okay.
And it depends on, it's something that licensing looks at depending on the setting.
Okay, and is this supervision, well, then when you're talking about supervision, are you talking about supervision of SLPAs or supervision of RPEs?
I'm talking about
or-
RPEs and SLPAs.
Okay, so that's actually some of the same issues that are coming before at a national level as well, so,
Yeah, our SLPA supervision guidelines are defined in regulation,
yes.
and, but the RPE guidelines, I don't know if they're quite as clear. I think we would apply the same types of settings and guidelines towards the RPE requirements.
Okay,
Can I ask a question for Melissa?
yes, please.
Sure.
Melissa, can you tell me, are there, to your knowledge, are there any regulatory barriers right now in California? Is there anything that our board should be looking at when it comes to telepractice? I know that we have a very basic definition in Business and Professions Code as to what telepractice is. And I know that it's pretty clear what the laws are for a licensee, what the restrictions are. Basically, if you're licensed in California, you can treat California patients. If you're treating patients out of state, you need to make sure you're licensed in that state. But are there any regulatory barriers that we should be looking into?
Yeah, right now in California, I haven't seen any regulatory barriers, which is a good thing. And I was pleased when the licensing board had the definition of telepractice and indicated that it was appropriate for telepractice services. Now, something interesting has come up in the last year, and I don't know, it's not clear where this is coming from, whether it's coming from the Department of Ed or it's coming from the licensing board, or if people are just making it up. But I've heard from a number of people and a number of companies who hire FLPs to do telepractice in California, but they're requiring the FLP to reside in California. And some people have indicated that the licensing board said that. Some people indicated that the Department of Ed has said that. I can't find anything, at least online, that indicates that. And maybe it's just the preference of the school district.
Yeah, I don't know of any requirement any residential requirement for any licensing in California.
Okay. Melissa, this is Dee. I have had calls from CTC, and their concern is how do we verify this individual? Not just the license in California, but do they meet the standards for the credential in California?
Can you repeat that?
Well, the issue, my understanding is, and this comes from my days of being in private practice in California and contracting with schools, is that when you contracted with a school, you didn't necessarily need to have your Department of Ed certification, that having the California license in speech-language pathology was adequate. And I know when I used to fill out my non-public agency forms, I would always list the FLP's licenses, and that was always adequate to become a non-public agency and serve kids in the schools. I do know that some school districts may require that. That's what tends to be the barrier, is having to get both a license and CDE credential.
CTC credential. Did you? I thought I heard CDE.
I'm sorry, did you ask me a question I didn't quite hear?
I may have misheard you, Melissa. I thought you said CDE, California Department of Ed. The ones who have contacted me are at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. CTC.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I meant CTC.
So this is Patty. So I guess in regards to that, what the CTC decides is their requirements for the SLP credential is their decision, not our decision. But if the school district we do have a regulation that if you have your SLP license, that you can also provide service in the schools, but some school districts don't want that. Some school districts would rather hire individuals who have their SLP credential to work in the schools. So that's really up to the individual school district. We don't have any control over that.
Correct.
But you don't have to have a license to work in the schools, but if you do, you can work in the schools. But again, it's really up to an individual school district as to what direction they want to go in. So my whole reason of saying all that is that really what our concern is those licensees. We only have control over our licensees, not what a school district decides which direction to go in.
Yeah, I think, it's hard when we have in California essentially two credentials that allow you to work in the state. Now, the CTC credential allows you to only work in the schools. Your license allows you to work in any setting, and that can get confusing for people who are outside of California and don't understand. At this point, when I look at licensure and that sort of thing, I go back and forth because I see a lot of clinicians jumping into telepractice knowing nothing about it and asking questions once they do it about things that they should have figured out before they jumped into telepractice. There are there are a couple of states that currently require a certain amount of hours of CE in telepractice, but those hours in CE telepractice don't necessarily train you to be an SLP. They may give you information about research out there. They may give you information about potential barriers. They may give you information about how to provide the services, but they really don't provide sort of global training. And while I believe that when any clinician goes to provide a new service delivery model, a new method of or a new technique in therapy, they should have some training or background in it before they jump in and do it. I think it's part of our code of ethics that we don't provide services that we're not qualified to provide, and yet I see that happening over and over with folks who want to provide telepractice services. However, I would be reluctant to recommend that they have to take CEs in it because that doesn't necessarily train them to do that. If it were me and I could decide how the laws or how the regulations read, I would want to see something in there that they need to have some sort of training. But that will change once universities start adopting telepractice and training their students in how to provide telepractice. Right now, there's a handful of universities that actually have coursework in telepractice. There's probably another handful of universities that maybe talk about it a little bit in one class in their clinical methods class. And again, there's a handful of universities that are providing practicum experience in telepractice, and that's what's really needed. I would hate to see something about training when we're seeing these changes happening at the university level. Once clinicians come out of school with some training, they begin to understand telepractice and what they need to do and how to do it, and I think they're much better off when they've had that exposure at the university level.
So this is Patty jumping in. I'm so glad you brought up this topic of continuing education, because this is something that we deal with in many different issues, continuing education for supervision as an example. So I understand that you're saying that you would be reluctant to define what type of training would be needed, but how our field evolves has always started out through continuing education, not through university coursework and experience. So when there's a new area in our field, it's always started at the grassroots level of someone, groups of speech-language pathologists have interests in particular areas and start learning more about them and start spreading the word through continuing education, and eventually it finds its way into university settings. But it would be unusual for it to start at the university setting and then filter down. So it's more of a grassroots rather than starting at the top. So I guess I'm a little concerned if the licensing board is concerned about continuing education, and I think we probably are. For us we aren't going to make requirements of universities. So this is a conundrum.
When you say concerned about...
No, it is, Patty, and I really understand that. My question is, and this is really across the board, does requiring CEUs, continuing education in telepractice or supervision or ethics or whatever other area, does that make them a better practitioner in that area? I'm a pediatric SLP. I've been a pediatric SLP all but 6 months of my career, and I would never do adult rehab. I would never do swallowing, and even if I went and took some courses in swallowing, I would never feel comfortable providing those services unless I had hands-on training with real patients with an experienced SLP standing next to me. So, again, taking all the coursework you can doesn't necessarily make you an appropriate provider. I think taking courses and understanding that if you're following regulations and if you're following, your code of ethics, then you won't provide those services until you are comfortable doing that through whatever means you can do that. For some people, it may be taking courses. For some people, it may be getting some sort of practicum experience or using simulations or, whatever it is. I'm not sure that a requirement of telepractice CEs is going to qualify you to take those courses or to provide telepractice services. That's,
I agree. but there needs to be some type of, we'll have to talk about it. We're bringing up issues right now, so I think that's the most important piece.
Melissa, this is Paul Sanchez again. Going back to my original question about whether this board had any barriers, has it been your experience in working in other states that the regulations that are promulgated create any types of barriers for telepractice within speech-language pathology?
Yes, there are a number of states that have requirements that make it difficult to provide telepractice services. Some states, as I mentioned earlier, state that the client has to be seen in person first by the telepractitioner before they can provide their services. Well, if I'm in California and I'm serving somebody in North Dakota, it's not cost effective for me to fly to North Dakota to see that client in person before I see them. There's another state that had that regulation, but then changed it so that any SLP and FLP needs to see the client in person before providing an SLP needs to see the client in person to determine whether or not that client is appropriate for telepractice services. The problem with that is that SLP may have biases against telepractice. They know nothing about telepractice, and they have no idea what makes a good candidate. And frankly, from the number of years that I've been doing telepractice, when I first started, we were only seeing kids with mild to moderate speech and language disabilities, thinking we could never see a child on the autism spectrum. We could never see a child with a hearing loss. We could never see a child who had attention difficulties. What I found is most kids, not all, but most kids can be seen via telepractice, and it can be a positive experience where the outcomes are good. And that has to be done on an individual basis, and you might have two kids with similar disabilities, and one of them does really well in telepractice and the other one can't handle it at all. And again, that's a clinical decision that should only be made by the telepractice clinician. And it's one of those things that SLPs do on a regular basis with their service delivery model. They're deciding what's best for that particular child, given their disability, their goals, the setting they're in. Those are decisions we make every day, and those should be left up to the clinician that's working with the child.
Thank you.
And I think those are really the two biggest barriers. There were a couple of states that did not allow telepractice or made clinicians jump through a lot of extra hoops. Louisiana has a really interesting license. They have a telepractice-only license for folks that live out of state. The cost is a bit less than the regular license. And if you're licensed in another state, you can get, as long as you're in good standing with that state and you need a letter stating that, they will give you a Louisiana license, but you have to promise not to provide service. If you have the telepractice-only license, you have to promise not to provide services on the ground in Louisiana. And I thought, that was a law that was innovative, I thought, and they did that probably 4 or 5 years ago, when most states weren't even addressing telepractice.
Any other questions from the SLP Practice Committee?
No.
Melissa, can you think of any other issues that you believe would be important for us to be considering and know about?
I think some of the things that I'm seeing are they're more around ethical issues, and again, because it's a new area, there's been some talk about SLPs being asked to see students that they felt were totally inappropriate, and the SLPs not feeling comfortable seeing the kids because they didn't feel it was appropriate, and not knowing what to do about it. But I don't know that that's within the purview of the licensing board. Most of the issues that are coming up are more around supervision and training.
Well, we have taken a lot of your time.
No, that's okay. I really don't mind, Patty. I'm good.
Well, we thank you so very much, because I think all of us feel much better educated about the area. We have some direction to go in as far as issues of supervision and training that we need to be sure to address if we choose to develop some new regulations in this area.
Yeah.
And I think it's been just extremely helpful. So,
Well, good.
thank you.
And if
Thank you
there's
so much.
any way I can help you down the road, I'd be very happy to do that.
Well, thank you again. We might be calling on you again. So
right.
have a really good
No
rest of your
problem.
day, and thank you so much again.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Okay, so now that we've completed our phone conference, does the public have any comments that they'd like to make regarding the area of SLP telepractice? Well, seeing none, then I believe we can adjourn this meeting of the SLP Practice Committee at 1:50 PM. Thank you all.
And at this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break.
Meeting of the Hearing Aid Dispenser Committee, and I'd like to make a roll call here first, start with Rodney.
Rod Diaz, otolaryngologist, committee member.
Karen Chang, public member.
There's a little button on the end. Okay.
Karen, sorry, first day.
That should have tell you before.
Okay.
Karen.
I think you just turned it off. Oh,
No,
no.
that's okay. When you have the green light
Okay,
here,
okay. Karen
now it's
Chang,
off,
public
now it's
member.
off. Here, leave it on, leave it on.
Karen Chang, public member.
Marcia Reggio, audiologist, committee member.
Okay, the issue before us is the status and of trainees as a hearing aid dispenser trainees. And we have some concern about the supervision of these trainees, but there's hearing aid dispenser supervising them. And so there's not, the first thing here is the term direct supervision, and this I would like to refer to legal counsel because I am aware that there is in somewhere in the code a definition for supervision, direct supervision, and immediate supervision. I don't know if it's in our code or it's somewhere else, and if we can refer to this to imply it here.
So it is in regulation, but it is for, it applies to SLPAs, so the assistants.
But I thought that there's something regarding the whole Code of California that has the same meaning for supervision.
No, not in your act. The supervision needs to be defined in regulation. So right now, you do have in, what is it? 119, is it?
1399.170, the slipper regulation.
Well, no, actually 1399.119, which is supervision of hearing aid dispenser trainees.
It says
You
You do
direct
have,
supervision.
it is called direct supervision, but it isn't as detailed as perhaps the SLPA regulations.
Can we go and have the same in our,
Yes, you could
move this the same thing as SLP to?
You could initiate a rulemaking to change the regulation to make your definition of direct supervision more in alignment, or however the board chooses to make it.
Yeah. Now,
Amnon, would you like me to share with you what
Yeah.
the definitions are?
Okay.
Okay, those definitions are found in California Code of Regulations 1399.170, and it starts with C, D, and E. Direct supervision means on-site observation and guidance by the supervising speech-language pathologist while a clinical activity is performed by the speech-language pathology assistant. Direct supervision performed by the supervising speech-language pathologist may include but is not limited to the following: observation of a portion of the screening or treatment, procedures performed by the speech-language pathology assistant, coaching the speech-language pathology assistant, and modeling for the assistant. Immediate supervision means the supervising speech-language pathologist is physically present during services provided to the client by the SLPA. I'm just going to say SLPA. Indirect supervision means the supervising SOP is not at the same facility or in close proximity to the SLPA, but is available to provide supervision by electronic means. Indirect supervision activities performed by the supervising speech-language pathologist may include, but are not limited to, and then it talks about different modalities.
But
So it
I'm
defines
almost
direct.
sure that there is another place in the California Code that says the definition of this besides SLP. That's what I want to check if there is anything, because I remember I researched this because of the medical regulation which we are working, and it says a hearing aid dispenser need an audiogram that will be performed by a physician, audiologist, or a person under the supervision of the physician. It doesn't say there indirect or direct or immediate. That's the law, supervision. So I researched it and I found it something.
Sure.
And supervision was the lowest type, and then direct, and then immediate. Immediate was over the shoulder. It means that you are here.
Right.
And so I think if you can look if the entire Code of California, if there's other places that
I can definitely look. It may be that under the medical board's
Yes.
statutes,
in the medical.
that they define what a supervising physician
Yes.
is and what they do. So that may not apply to our act. It may apply in the sense that if a supervising physician is working with a licensee, that they are required to do those things.
Yeah, at that time supervision was kind of, I look at your work and I'll sign on it, I don't have to be in the same building, and direct supervision was the same thing, but I have to be in next room, something, and immediate supervision was I have to be over your shoulder when you do the shot or the surgery or whatever.
So I can take a look, but I do think that my understanding of it right now is that the regulation would need to be tightened if you wanted it to be more in line.
I would say that the direct supervision is not an unreasonable designation here. What's more unreasonable to me is it says within the same work setting a minimum of 20% of the time. I think that's much more worrisome, that they only have to have direct supervision 20% of the time. That appears to me
Yeah.
to
But
be
I think we have
the issue.
two basic categories of this. One is the administrative, the audiometer performance and the selection of hearing aids, and then taking of an ear mold impression. And this is the most concerning me. The taking of an ear mold impression, the trainee will take it by himself. Because I don't know exactly how it's worked right now. Last time we had trainees in our business was 33 years ago. At that time, there was no supervision. You just collect used car salesman and give him an audiometer, and he's doing the whole thing. But today, I'm afraid that some people will abuse it, like if a person in Sacramento wants to open a business in San Diego, and he have his cousin going there, and he sign him as a trainee, and he's doing ear molds in San Diego, while the person, the supervisor, maybe once a month he's going in a weekend for him over there. That's my concern. So my suggestion was to have the taking of an ear mold impression as an immediate supervision, which means he has to be by his side, because we know that like almost 50% are failing the exam, the practical exam so that's my concern. So I want to hear from other people.
Does anyone know what the genesis of these regulations are? None of us have been on this
This-
board
yeah.
long enough, and certainly not before the board and the.
When was it written?
Yeah.
Do you know when? You can look at the
tell you
law.
that.
The direct supervision.
And the 20%, like what Marcia was saying, like
That
who
one,
who pulled that percent out of the hat?
Okay, are you ready?
Don't forget the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
19, I want it to be really dramatic. 1986.
86. Yeah, I told you. I mean, I was 1985 when we had our training. So we done it a year before it was.
It seems like we could ask for 100% supervision, or we could do it as you're saying, certain activities require immediate supervision,
Yes.
others less so.
Rod, did we answer your, I'm sorry.
The hearing aid trainee category was created in 1986?
The- At least by 1986, that's when the supervision requirements were, right?
Yeah.
So that's when the regulations went into effect. The statute that establishes the temporary license,
It's before.
it's before, so right now my book says 2011, but that probably would have been when the boards,
In the late
the boards
70s,
merged.
it could be.
Did we answer your question about the, kind of the genesis of this, the supervision, or were you talking about the
I mean,
actual?
no,
I'm talking about Rod's question about the trainee license.
Like, who decided that a trainee only needed 20%
Oh,
supervision?
okay. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Somebody in 1986.
And I'll bet the board at that time was primarily hearing aid dispensers.
It
Would
was,
have been the
it
bureau.
was a bureau or committee.
Yeah.
And then who ran that?
And it would have been very different from the regulation process that's in place today as well.
Well, I think that sounds like everyone on the committee believes that greater oversight is necessary.
In certain area,
Yeah.
it's
Remind me one
extreme.
more time, they caption it, if you don't talk in a microphone, they can't hear you.
Mine is okay, right? Is mine all right?
Thank you. Otherwise, we'll
just
get a phone
checking.
call. Sorry about that.
So, I mean, if we are all in agreement, what would the next step be to modify these regulations?
So you have a few options. You could direct staff to sort of do a rough draft to bring back to the committee or to bring back to the full board at a later time. You could sit here today and try and hammer out what that might look like. You could, the chair of this committee could appoint a task force to work on those regulations. Those are some options that you have.
I think it would be helpful if you want staff to develop language or work with legal counsel to develop language, that we get some direction
Yeah.
as to where we want to go, because it's a broad area. Right now, we're looking at 80% of the time, these trainees are unsupervised. And we're looking at direct supervision, we're looking at training requirements. Even when they are supervised, are they provided with any training before they create an ear mold impression?
I think it's hard to assess and to go and enforce how they are training and this. This will come at a test. They will have they have a time limit to take the test, right? The trainee cannot be unlimited time.
Well, the point I'm making is I think it'd be helpful to get some direction.
Yeah, so I would like to give some direction. If we look at there's a list here, there's no paragraph name, training with an audiometer and training with hearing aid procedure including. So I think taking the ear mold impression, which include the ear inspection, should be 100% of the time under immediate supervision. And the rest of the things might be in direct supervision or supervision, maybe at much higher percentage than 20%. That's my
Right.
thing.
In that section, it says that it doesn't require the supervisor to provide a certain number of hours. So maybe we could maybe, I don't know if we want in requesting language, do we want to request that a certain number of hours be provided to the trainee for these things? And
If we request 100%, let's say on something, then if you
it would be. I agree with you. I think that we probably would want the trainee to be supervised 100% of the time, but maybe before they go to take their before they go to take their test to be a hearing aid dispenser, that in addition to 100% supervision, that they required to complete a certain number of hours working at the audiometer, or a certain number of hours doing in-ear inspection or taking ear mold impression, like 40 hours.
But today,
I don't know how many hours you think would be necessary, because right now it says that there's no specified number of
I know,
hours. They would
because
need to do these certain number of things. They could do 20 minutes worth and then take the test. Maybe they would need to do a certain number of hours of these things before they'd be allowed to take the test.
but today,
That's why I think that it maybe would be helpful to.
you can take the exam without even being a trainee. You can go right away and take the exam. So there is no requirement.
So maybe, right,
so
right.
you-
And that's kind of a loophole. So maybe we don't need to.
no, because there's some people that take the test without
Without
training,
ever having-
without training.
Without ever having been a
Right.
hearing aid
Right.
trainee.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the issue, the issue of the memo wasn't to change the licensing requirement or the examination requirement. It was to consider whether it is a consumer protection or safety issue that even under supervision, this person would be creating an ear mold impression. And if you think that having supervision provides adequate safety, then I think we can just look at the supervision issue.
Yeah. Because a person, let's say, a lot of people are here in the hearing aid business are family business. I mean, a lot of.
Yeah. So how many
so-
trainees actually go on to become fully licensed hearing aid dispensers? How many hearing aid dispensers go the route of being a trainee first versus just go straight to being a dispenser?
The administration, the staff can know.
We could probably give a ballpark figure.
I mean, yeah. Is it
Are you saying what percentage of the
hearing aid dispensers go the route of
candidates
being a
come
trainee?
through the
Yeah.
trainee route?
Right.
We can look at the past.
I mean, is it even worth the discussion of needing specified number of hours, like what we just, the 2 minutes?
Yeah. No, I think the test is the practical test is our gatekeeper for people who knows to take ear mold impression.
Right.
And some people will not be a trainee, but they will be trained to take ear mold impression and go to the test.
Yeah. So,
I think when looking at this, you've got three aspects that the board can regulate. You can do training, you can do supervision, and you can do the supervisor, what requirements need to be met for someone to be the supervisor. And with that, I know that generally speaking, you're right, that a hearing aid dispenser can take the examination and be fully licensed without taking any training. However, they have shown the board that they have met those minimum competencies and skills in order to safely practice. So with a hearing aid trainee, they have not passed the examination. Now, there is the caveat in regulation that if they do not pass the examination, I think then
100%.
then yes, it is complete direct supervision when they complete tasks by the supervisor. But I think the committee needs to think about what are those things that a hearing aid trainee may do that would maybe potentially cause the public harm if they're not trained well enough, supervised well enough, or their supervisor doesn't have the correct qualities.
If they take the test and fail, then it's 100% supervision.
Yeah, let me,
But if, what, does that include if they're a hearing aid trainee?
so it says, if a trainee applicant, a hearing aid trainee, fails the license examination, the supervising dispenser is required to be physically present at all fittings and sales made by the trainee applicant, regardless of whether these occur in or outside the supervising dispenser's business location.
Uh-huh. So if the hearing aid trainee doesn't take the test, then the supervisor only has to be present 20% of the time.
Right. However, the license, lots of layers. The license itself is only good for 6 months. It can be renewed up to 2 times. So the maximum potential is about 1.5 years for somebody to be practicing, which, the committee may ask themselves, what's the potential for harm there? 1.5 years of practicing. But that is what it is right now. So.
Yeah, we gotta change this now.
That's why I don't think we have to wait until a trainee fail to have 100% supervision.
Yeah, I think we should, I think we should.
We should go on 100%.
Okay, so then I would ask the committee to kind of give some guidelines to staff and myself when working on this. What are the categories or types of areas or where you think 100% supervision is required, or do you think it's required all the time? And I don't know exactly, and Amnon, maybe you can help me a little bit here too. I don't know exactly. It seems that these regulations also contemplate that the supervisor may not even be at the location where the hearing aid dispenser trainee is working. So they could be an hour away or something.
And that's because there's no real definition to direct supervision. Even though it may exist in medical board law, there is no reference to it.
We have to define supervision, and I think it's good to define them as the medical law. I mean, which says supervision is whenever direct supervision in the same building, and immediate supervision is over the shoulder.
So we can come up with the wording for the definitions, but your intent is that if someone is working with an ear mold impression or an ear inspection, that the supervisor must be there working with them over their shoulder?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
it's clear?
Are there any other areas of practice?
If we don't have training in here in any way, and I kind of see why it's difficult to do that, but you wouldn't want to let somebody loose programming hearing aids either with no training. So we're making big assumptions here. They're trained in otoscopy, they're trained in ear impressions, they're trained in programming. We're making those assumptions that all that has to take place without stipulating it. So if that's the case, you don't want to send somebody and say, here's the hearing aid, here's the software, go to it. Are we assuming that we don't do that and that would never happen? Do we have to stipulate that it can't? It's not dangerous, physically dangerous, but I mean, it's the whole purpose is compromised with that.
Well, if the trainee is negligent, violates the Practice Act, it's on the supervisor. The supervisor is responsible too.
They would, but I'm not
There is
sure.
no requirement for training.
Yeah.
So that's where we run into a problem. Even if we require it for this, it's still not a requirement for anyone to get training. So that's another issue that I think the board is looking at is, I'll say licensing or examination requirement, because that's really what it comes down to. Some type of, the board in their strategic plan has an apprenticeship or traineeship, and I think that's something that we're going to be looking at in the future.
I believe today licensing does not require to know programming. Is there any test? No.
It's just, well,
A person can be a licensed hearing aid dispenser, doesn't know how to program a hearing aid today.
what does the alteration of hearing aids? Does that mean physical
Alteration.
alteration of hearing aids, or?
The alteration of ear mold and hearing aids, they can be both physical and programming.
So I think that if you as committee members are asking these questions, the regulation's not very clear.
Oh,
So,
of course.
if you would like to make it more clear, that can be done.
How can the staff develop this language without the input of the expertise of people involved in this work? Is that possible that they just do it and send out, say, what do you think?
Yes, it could be a collaborative effort. You could make a task force of certain board members. I would recommend 2 or more so that it wouldn't be considered a meeting. We could bring it back to the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee prior to going to the full board. Or
There's nothing that would prevent us from discussing it right now. We can discuss.
Right, exactly. Or you could be telling us right now, these are the things that we think need direct supervision. These are the things that we need training for, and these are what they're called. And that's sort of what I'm asking is,
Yeah, I'd recommend that we look at this language. We've got experts in the room right now that we will not have when staff is looking at this. So I would recommend that to the extent that we can nail some of these things down right now, we should do that.
Yeah, we can, any comments from the public?
Good afternoon, Vanessa Kahina on behalf of the Hearing Healthcare Providers of California. Really appreciate the board taking the time to have a thorough conversation about this. This has been an issue that we've been discussing within our membership and that they're very passionate about increasing and improving the regulations in terms of patient safety within California. We do believe that, one, the supervision definition needs to be clarified. I agree with you, Board Member Shalev, that it should probably be within the medical board terminology, which is very clear and very precise and allows for correct supervision, checkpoints, and standards, and leaves no room for question within what the practice would be. It would also help to crack down on potential bad actors who might be using trainees to facilitate their business practices. So there's that piece of that. When we get into the duties that should be supervised, I believe that HHP isn't wedded to any specific percentages, but does believe that potentially ear molds and ear impressions and patient contact are places where there absolutely would have to be 100% supervision. However, all that being said, without actually seeing language presented to us, it's difficult to make this an iterative process. If there were to be a task force, we would very much appreciate our input being taken, but also want to make sure that is a public voice on this or is public comment on this, that it's comfortably within the realms of what your legal team needs to draft something that would pass muster in the regulatory process. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we need someone to supply the medical board terminology to us?
I can look that up for you.
Okay, so we don't have it now to.
No, but if you delegate and tell me and staff that is the terminology that you want, I can look it up.
We don't know until
But
we've
we know
seen
what
it.
we want. We want over-the-shoulder, physically
Right.
present. So whatever that definition is, if it's not available to us, we can create a definition and put it in regulation.
We can, so the staff should know that every procedure that has a risk of health safety, we should have 100% immediate supervision. Now, for the other things of testing and programming, I think we can go to a direct supervision, and then the percentage can between 50 to 100.
So,
we can
I mean,
talk about it.
basically, any procedure where there's a patient involved or where you're touching a
Yeah,
patient
when you,
needs to be
100% immediate, yeah.
What are those procedures?
It's,
So ear mold impression
Okay.
or doing
Your inspection.
an ear inspection
yeah,
or doing an audiogram.
yeah.
And
Do the-
programming
sure,
hearing aid,
right.
you're with the patient when you're programming hearing aid.
Right.
You don't do it without them.
So alteration of an ear mold, not necessarily, right?
No,
'Cause
but when you said programming of a hearing aid, let's say that you spend a lot of time with a trainee and to program a certain hearing aids, and you feel that he can do it. I mean, we can leave him to do
Yeah.
some
So that doesn't
programming
necessarily have to be-
without the immediate supervision.
Yeah, that doesn't have to be 100% direct
Same.
supervision.
Right.
But
If we took the word of all these people to say, well, I think I can do it, we wouldn't need any of this language. So I don't think that's a good premise to start with.
no, I know,
No,
but
no,
what I'm saying is, if we're trying to decide what are the procedures where we're trying to nail down,
The whole premise of this thing says to me that
100%
a
direct
trainee
supervision.
comes in to a situation, we're taking on faith that that supervisor is providing all the initial training on whatever the task may be. It's full, it's complete, it's as many hours as necessary to launch this person into doing it independently. And I don't know that we can make that leap. I don't know. I mean, I would like to hear from some trainees or some supervisors to know exactly how it goes.
no, but all I'm saying is that the we're trying to say what are the procedures that require 100% supervision?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not confused about that. I just have another view of it, that you might think, well, you can't physically harm somebody programming their hearing aid. So if they feel like they're doing okay, we can let them go and do it. And I'm saying that there have been people who've abused that
But,
and done it incorrectly,
but-
sent people out with hearing aids way too loud for their hearing loss, and perhaps created further hearing loss because of it.
But the problem is that you're here setting the bar more than even a licensee, because today somebody who passed the test can go out with a license and dispense hearing aid and program them too loud. It's not a trainee, it's a licensee. So this, I don't know how we can overcome that everybody will be perfect, but there's no test on programming. There's no test today, so I don't know how we can enforce it.
Hi, sorry, Amy White from CAA, audiologist. So just to clarify, maybe, Paul, was your statement maybe that where Marcia's headed in terms of what regulations or what we should change in terms of, hours required before we can be a trainee or before we can take a test, that is a separate issue than what we're talking about right now, and it should be handled totally separately? Are we mixing two things right now?
Well, we have a concept that we should be looking at people that come and take the exam meeting some type of requirement. People that apply for a license of a hearing aid coming with some qualifications. That is a separate issue. What I wrote in the memo was that another thing to consider is under supervision, you have a trainee. Should that trainee be provided some training, even doing it under your supervision? I'm not suggesting that they need training, but I'm putting the question out there. Should there be a requirement?
Right.
Now, to the question of whether it's a separate issue, I think that we have a gap here that needs to be dealt with immediately.
Right.
And that's what we're doing, and that's the supervision aspect.
Okay, so I would, be completely on the same page and think, in my experience, having had not just hearing aid dispenser trainees, but audiology, students and people who haven't been exposed to hearing aids, that the direct supervision is a huge piece. And I would say that the support of having, if you want to refer to as immediate supervision, but over the shoulder at least for ear mold impression taking, and I would argue also for hearing testing to make sure it's being done properly, being vital. And then, as you said, in the same location, at least being present while anything else is going on regarding hearing aid programming. I think in an ideal world, we would have immediate supervision for all of that for a certain period of time. But if the issue at hand isn't addressing required number of hours and or a training program of some kind and just trying to do a stopgap at the moment in terms of supervision, I think, but I think what Marcia maybe you're getting at is more training like an actual requirement for clock hours.
Actually, I'm not, because,
No?
I mean, yes, that would be great, but trying to, not enforce it, but just trying to design it would be really difficult, let alone comply with it.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you've had trainees, or you've observed dispenser trainees, what kind of training do you provide, or have you observed?
So in my personal experience, most of my trainees are coming from the undergraduate program at Sac State, and they happen to be students who wanted to do audiology, but for whatever reason aren't pursuing that, and so now they're interested in getting their dispensing license. So most of them will be observing with me in clinic for the better part of a year before they even start sitting for examinations, and most of them will be observing for the better part of the year before they even put in for a trainee license to do anything. They're literally just observing. So, it's very
Do you have
different.
any idea if that's unusual, or?
I think it's very unusual. In fact, one such person who had been with me for over a year, did not yet have her trainee license, was hired by a franchise type location, applied for her trainee license, got it, and then was put in a different location completely separate from any dispenser provider, totally on her own. And she didn't know anything about fitting hearing aids or doing any of it on her own yet. And then she failed the exam and had to get then 100% supervision, so then she lost her job. But I think that is a very common experience right now, that some of the large franchises are using that trainee license to throw a warm body into these different locations, and they have absolutely no support. And then if they fail that test, then we finally catch them. But, she was doing it for 6 months before she failed the test. So
That's what I was afraid of. And I think that if we just put one thing here, which require 100% immediate supervision on ear impression, just this one thing will eliminate a lot of problems here. Because I have the feeling that the trainee program is being abused by people that wants to go and have more people dispensing hearing aids. They'll do it for 6 months, then they'll take another round for 6 months, and so on. So I think just this thing will be a big contribution to the program.
I have a question. To get a trainee license, don't you have to go through some type? You just kind of fill out an application.
You have to be 18 years of age.
That's all.
That's it.
Yeah, and heart beating.
And
Okay.
have a high school diploma or equivalent.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So as a consumer and the first time on this board, I had no idea that to do an ear mold, and all you need is really an application. And I think that a lot of the consumers out there probably don't know, and they entrust that the person, the technician, is trained somewhat. So the two things that you talked about, like a type of a training program, I think is very important. And then also the
100%
percent.
immediate supervision on ear.
Yeah. So another, really hesitant to go and get hearing aids.
So another wrinkle I was going to throw out there too is that also at this time, there is no requirement that the supervisor have any sort of, they just have to have a license, essentially.
Doesn't have to have a license?
They have to have a license.
There are no additional requirements for a supervisor other than that
He has a
they're
license.
not being they're not part of an investigation, and that they have to have a license for 3 years, I believe.
No,
Okay.
that is if they want a waiver.
Oh, that's right.
That's if they want a waiver. So if they want to supervise more than one hearing aid trainee, they have to request a waiver from the board. And that is when the board looks and says, you can't be, you have to have your license for 3 years, and
That's
can't be a part of an investigation. But if you're only supervising one, you just have to have a license.
So Kelsey makes
we
a-
can do it 3 years as well for one.
But let me just,
The first one.
I want to just reiterate that Kelsey makes a really good point, and that's often confused. When we read those regulations, we think these are supervision requirements, but these are requirements for someone who wants to supervise more than one applicant trainee. So I think we have to look at supervision requirements, which I think we can model them against other supervision requirements that we have for other types of licensees of the board that are supervisors. But the other issue that we need to look at is how many applicant trainees do we want? Right now, the requirement, the default is one, but many of the supervisors out there want to supervise more than one. They want to supervise the maximum as a default.
The maximum is 3?
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, but I think the problematic thing on what you said right now is that you don't need, you can have a license for one day and supervise somebody. And I think we should go from the first one, you needed 3 years.
Do you want that license to be clear from discipline?
Of course.
Yeah, we can come up with that.
Question, is this the same license? This isn't like the application license. This is a license where they go through the test and they complete the ear mold impression and they pass and everything. Okay.
Yes. So the supervising hearing aid dispenser must be in good standing, and we can define that, and be a licensed hearing aid dispenser or a dispensing audiologist for 3 years. And we'll leave the current requirements alone, that they can have. It says a licensed hearing aid dispenser shall not supervise more than one trainee applicant at any time unless a specific waiver has been granted by the board. And then I think we can look at the waiver criteria too and maybe beef that up.
Right, well, if you're going to change the requirement for one to basically be all the requirements,
Right.
then everybody would meet the waiver requirements.
Well, that's why I said we got to beef up
Yeah,
the waiver.
so-
Yeah.
So does the committee have a feeling on that? Would you rather there be a waiver requirement or that you could just supervise 3?
I think they want us to, what I heard was supervision requirement of 3 years, right?
Yeah, need the 3 years even to supervise the first one.
Right.
And then a waiver.
And then what I was saying is, prior to that section in 1399.116, it talks about the waiver language. I think that board staff can look at the waiver language, beef that up, and bring it back to the board to review, to make it consistent with other.
Why do we need the waiver if we doing it, the person have to have a 3 years license before he can supervise maximum of 3?
Well, it doesn't, the law doesn't say right now a maximum of 3. The law says that they shall not supervise more than one unless a waiver has been granted.
Oh,
Right.
so we can change the whole language here.
I think we should leave that alone. I think it should be one
Yeah.
unless a waiver has been
And
granted.
then,
But
what the waiver is something bureaucratic. What do we need the waiver if the person who supervised only one has already a 3 years with no discipline on his record, and he wants to go to 2 trainees? Why does he has, what kind of waiver he needs?
Well, that's up to the board. I mean, do you want it to be a default to allow a supervisor to supervise 3 trainees automatically?
Yeah. What do we do with the waiver? If somebody has a 3 years
So
license,
that's
and he-
what I'm asking you. What do you want it to be? Do you want it to be 1 or do you want it to be 3? Because how can
No, I
you
want
supervise
up
3
to
people
3.
100% of the time?
A person who has a license for 3 years can supervise up to 3 trainees.
So you want the default to be 3 trainees?
But that's
Up to-
that's the question. How can you directly supervise 3 trainees 100% of the time?
Well, I think once you will put the 100% immediate supervision, you won't have it.
Well, that's what I'm
I
saying.
know, you will not be able to do it.
I know.
But we're leaving a loophole for the bad actors.
That you're directly contradicting your own your own regulation.
Yeah.
So why directly contradict your own regulation?
Unless theoretically, unless the 3 of them are here.
I know, so why directly contradict your own regulation unless you specifically ask for a waiver and say, well, I want a waiver because these are my 3 kids and they're all going to be in
Yeah.
the same. So then just apply for the waiver. So just make the regulation 1.
Yeah.
And then for the family that
And
wants
the
3, ask for
waiver needs to go and have a reason why ask. When you get
Yes.
a waiver,
Yeah.
there is a reason?
Yeah, So
I
again,
didn't know
the way the law is written is, there's a restriction to 1.
Yes.
If someone wants more than 1, then it should be up to the board's discretion to allow that. Now, there's some criteria as far as enforcement is concerned.
Yeah.
I think with 100% supervision, off the top of my head, I would want to understand how they're going to supervise more than 1. Now, it may be, I'm going to supervise this guy Monday and Tuesday, this guy Wednesday and Thursday, and this guy on
It's
Friday.
not working all the time, yeah, you
Right,
can.
well, but that's.
But I still want to know that. I don't want it to be a
So
default.
this will be staff dealing with it,
Yes.
not coming to the board for each
Right.
particular case.
Just like we do it right
Yeah,
now.
so we leave,
That-
okay, so we leave the waiver up to 1.
That's why we'd want the default to be.
Yes.
1.
Okay, I didn't know that there is a procedure of reasoning with a waiver. Okay, but that's
That's why we wanted
fine.
to leave it at 1.
Yes.
Just wondering if there's anything under audiology aids, audiology aids training requirements we could borrow. But that sounds like it would take a lot of looking in here to come up with that. Audiology assistance, what kind of training is expected
There
for dispensing
there are
aids?
none.
None?
No.
Does it look like we're all in agreement that it should be 100% direct supervision? That it should be
Immediate
changed to
supervision.
that?
Oh, you're talking about the other elements of the,
No, ju-
about the ear mold impression, I'm in favor of 100% immediate supervision of the ear mold impression.
Well, we can say it a couple of ways. You know, there's 100% direct supervision with the exception of this and this, which require immediate supervision.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
I
can do
agree.
this.
Yeah.
And there's still no,
So I have ear inspection, audiogram, taking of ear mold impressions 100% of the time. Based on our discussion, I have all other tasks 50% of the time.
where did you
And
get
we-
that, 50%?
I thought that's what I thought we said.
And then, Marcia, you felt that that alteration of ear molds and alteration of hearing aids was 100% of the time as well.
I don't. I was thinking programming would be, because I think that's patient contact.
Alteration of hearing aids. and
Alteration of hearing aids, I mean, if that's what
programming
that
100% of the
means,
time as well.
I think in this context, it may mean I'm going to take that and going to buff and grind down the side here so it doesn't hurt. That's
Or,
an
okay,
alteration
then,
of the
well,
hearing aid.
Programming of hearing aids would be 100% of the time as well.
Yeah, I think that,
I mean, I defer to the two of you. You're the experts. If you feel that 100% of the time.
I don't think 100, just because it's not a safety issue, and the second reason, it's not a requirement by a licensee to know how to program a hearing aid.
I think that's an irrelevant argument, that, yes, that we license people who are incompetent. What does that say about us? You know, that we do that. Hopefully, we don't, or we don't do it much, if at all. So we don't want to say, well, just because licensees screw up doesn't mean we can support the idea that trainees ought to be allowed to.
No, 50% of the time, we can go 75% of the time. I don't know, I mean, like, what percent of,
Yeah, I could live with less than 100 for that, but I wouldn't,
Okay.
not
I-
none.
no, I didn't say none at all, 50%, I thought, on programming and 100% on ear molds.
How do they?
We have specific criteria for the practical exam, and it's actually also in regulation. And I think what Amnon is saying is that he doesn't believe this is covered in the practical exam. Is that what you're saying,
Yeah,
Amnon?
the programming of a hearing aid.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about that,
That's correct.
or whether it's covered in the written or practical.
It's not in the practical, and I doubt if it's on the written.
And we could probably cover that in a closed session discussion. We start talking specifically about the exam.
Yeah, because there's so many, I mean, not so a lot, but dozen manufacturers with different programming methods and different models, and so that's why it would.
I'm sorry, that's in 1399-120, where it covers what's in the exam. 1399-120, section F on page 50, for anyone else that wants to look at it.
Yeah.
What about just do immediate supervision for anything that's patient contact, doing the ear molds?
Yeah, that's why I think we're good.
Immediate switches, and then direct. So let's not do percentages, and then do direct supervision for everything else that doesn't, like, I guess there's like medical referrals here.
By the way, yeah, she's
Do
right,
it the other way
Karen.
around.
Karen is right. If we do 100% direct supervision on
And just don't do
on
percentages.
programming, let's say, you don't have to be over the shoulder. You can be in your office, and the guide you're training in the other office. So this will cover it. Yes.
For HHP, I would agree that this is a good point, that being able to have the different levels of definition also then cuts down on just having a trainee mill kind of practice. So I think that this is a direction that the board would go in and would be supportive of.
But and not have any percentages, right? Okay.
So say it again.
So immediate supervision for anything that, is direct contact with the patient, and then direct supervision for anything like medical. I see here medical referrals. I figured that doesn't involve patient touching and stuff. So.
It does.
Oh, it does?
It does.
What it means is being able to do otoscopy and look at pathology there and know when to refer.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Right.
Well, anything that, doesn't
But
involve.
patient contact is also programming hearing aids.
Yeah.
You rarely program them without the person.
Okay.
Not all the time, but mostly
Mhm.
that's patient contact.
Okay.
It's really a shame that you
Someone
can
needs
get
to
a
provide me
license and not know
definitions.
how to program.
But I think it's a good not just compromise but definition to have immediate supervision on ear mold impression and direct supervision on all the other stuff, 100% on all of them. And direct supervision is the person's going to be in the same building, on the same office. And if the trainee wants to make a referral and he doesn't know, hey, I need to refer or not, he calls his supervisor and says, look at this, do I have to refer or not? So it should be 100%.
I'm just thinking for my own, if someone were to put an ear mold on me, I just want to make sure that it's not painful, right? And so if say you were to do I've never had an ear mold, but if you were to do it, if it's the direct patient contact and the act of doing it into the ear and it'll hurt, I want somebody that knows what they're doing behind me. But if it's somebody that's just on the side, tweaking with, I don't know, the sound or the software, then I'm okay. But if you put it in my ear and it's really loud, I want somebody, that can be able to take it out really quick and figure what's wrong. So,
So
yeah,
I
the
agree with
direct
Marcia,
supervision, yeah.
100% direct supervision for all the other procedures. I think we can have a motion here. If somebody will have a motion.
require this,
Do you
right?
want, Marcia?
I'm just looking at this one thing that you guys put in the board book here is about Regulation 1399-119 does not require the supervisor to provide a specific number of hours of training in any of the following tasks. Is that an issue? You put it in there. Is it worthy of?
Well, I think that if we have the trainees being supervised all the time, it becomes less of an issue. Because it's a responsibility of the supervisor now to ensure that this is being done safely. And to Karen's point, from a consumer perspective, I want to know, I agree with her that there's a licensed person that I'm dealing with, that I know that the person that is fitting my hearing aid, and if it's a trainee, that there is a licensed person watching that person perform that procedure. So I think that has partially been addressed. And then in the broader scale, we're going to look at traineeship, apprenticeships, and that issue. What would be helpful, at whatever motion we make, is that members of this committee look at section 1399.116 through 1399.119 and provide us with your direct feedback on any other issues so that when we present.
Which one, you said one?
So 1399.116
Two?
through 1399.119.
Okay.
If you could read those regulations and provide us with any direct feedback, suggestions, then we can incorporate that in our discussion when we put together the proposed language. Now I think we were entertaining a motion.
What is that?
Yeah, the motion is just to make 100% immediate on all aspect of ear mold impression and 100% direct supervision for all the rest.
May I
Endoscopy.
assist?
Please.
Would you like to make a motion that, to direct board staff and legal counsel to draft proposed regulations that incorporate the discussion that was had today and the changes that were discussed, and bring them back to the committee for approval and recommendation to the full board?
And you feel like you
Ron said what you said.
you have a full grasp of what
I think we do.
the notions are. Okay.
And to reiterate, it will come back again before the committee, and then the full board will then also have the ability to weigh in and discuss and vote on it. So, and you'll also have the ability to have public comment the next time with the text with you guys, as well as public comment with the full board, and so I think that all your changes could be incorporated that way.
Right. Also, I believe the staff has the recording of this section of the meeting, and they can look if.
Yes, and the board minutes will assist with that.
Moved. So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Call for the vote.
Public comment first.
Is there any public comments before we vote? Okay, call for the vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes, so it's all in favor.
And then, Amnon, we didn't do public comment for items not on the agenda. Would you mind addressing that, please?
Is there any items that can be heard by the Hearing Aid Dispenser Committee before we adjourn? See none, so the committee is adjourned.
Back in session, and at this time, I would like to call for the roll call, starting with Rod.
Rod Diaz, otolaryngologist, public board member.
Karen Chang, public member.
Amnon Shalev, Hearing Aid Dispenser Board Member.
Marcia Raggio, audiologist, board member.
Dee Parker, speech language pathologist, board chair.
Patty Solomon Rice, speech language pathologist, board member.
Debbie Snow, public board member.
Paul Sanchez, executive officer.
Kelsey? No.
Kelsey Pruden. Kelsey Pruden, DCA Legal.
Okay, we have established a quorum.
If anyone else wants to.
Right, but any members of the audience like to introduce themselves, please do so now.
Brianne Humphries, operations manager for the board.
Amy White, audiologist and CAA board member.
Karen Robinson, board staff. Carla Newman, board staff.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. We're now at item number 2. We're going to swear in our newest, a reappointed board member, Dr. Margaret D. Parker, and our newly appointed public board member, Karen Chang. And I just wanted to give you a little bio on Karen. Karen is a native Californian, active in the community. She was the past president of the Taiwanese American Citizens League, a board member for Plaza de la Raza Child Development Services, and currently serves on the Citizens Technical Advisory Council for the Puente Hills Habitat Preservation Authority. Karen graduated from New York University Stern School of Business and received her master's degree in public policy at the University of Southern California. She's worked for Congresswoman Hilda Solis and State Controller John Chang. Karen is a public member of the Speech Language Pathology, Audiology, Hearing Aid Dispensers Board, and was recently appointed by Speaker Anthony Rendon. We want to welcome you, Karen, to our board. Thank you. This time I'm going to ask Karen and Dee Parker to stand, and we're going to swear you in as board members. And I think the easiest way to do this is just to raise your right hand, and when I say your name, you'll say your name, okay? Okay, so for the office of Member of Speech Language Pathology, Audiology, and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board, I, say your name,
Karen Chang.
do solemnly swear that I will support, and, go ahead,
Do solemnly swear that I will support
and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California
and defend the Constitution of the United States and the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance
and I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
and I will well and discharge the duties which I am about to enter. Thank you.
Sections.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Come back from closed session. When we come back from closed session, we are going to.
Okay. At this point, we are going into closed session, and we will, at the end of that closed session, be recessing for the day. So please come back tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.